The first reading from Job began in a rather interesting way, don't you think? Do you remember how it began? It began with the Lord addressed Job out of the storm. The Lord addressed Job out of the storm. Tuck that away for a bit. We'll come back to it later. Now, the reading from Job actually picked up Job's story near the end. Before that, for more than 30 chapters, Job and his friends talked about God, about all the awful tragedies that had befallen him, and whether it was Job's fault. Job's so-called friends accused him of sinning, while Job, all the while, maintained his innocence. For some 30 chapters, spanning more than a week of time, Job's friends brought all their considerable combined and self-proclaimed wisdom to bear on the conundrum of why Job, a man reputed to be just and holy, and he was, by the way, though his friends didn't believe it, why Job would have such tragedies befall him. And finally, in chapter 38, where the first reading today began, God himself joins the conversation. Now, we might expect God to justify himself to Job and his friends in light of all Job went through, or at least explain why it had to be so. But he doesn't. In fact, God completely ignored Job's friends, who styled themselves the pinnacle of wisdom, and spoke directly to Job and in essence asked him, "Who do you think you are?" And in a passage a bit past where the reading stopped today, God, in answer to Job's completely understandable question of why all this happened, in essence said, "Hush, child, you cannot possibly understand." But that's no answer, you might well protest. Or is it? Let's turn to the gospel to see what light it might shed on God's response to Job. In the gospel, you'll recall, our Lord was fast asleep as the apostles did all in their power to keep the boat afloat in the midst of the terrible storm. Now, at first, our Lord choosing this time for slumber might seem a bit, at the least, incongruous, a bit odd, especially given the dire situation. But it becomes interesting and even somewhat amusing when we consider in the first reading God spoke to Job out of the storm. So perhaps, just like someone who lives near train tracks hardly notices train whistles or the sound of trains going by, if you're God who is used to being in the midst of storms, why being in yet another one, why should that prevent you from getting a little more shut-eye? In any case, there is something you might not have noticed about the sequence of events in the gospel today. Let's carefully review them. First, in the midst of the storm, the disciples woke Jesus up. Second, our Lord told the sea, "Quiet, be still." Third, there was great calm. It was at this time Jesus asked the disciples, "Why are you terrified?" Not why were you terrified, that is, during the storm, but why are you still terrified, even now? You see, the focus of the disciples' terror had moved from the powerful storm to the power of our Lord to quiet the storm. They didn't understand that power, and that terrified them. In the first reading, where God said to Job, in essence, "Hush, child, you cannot possibly understand," God didn't answer Job's well-founded and quite understandable question of why did all this have to happen? But being a man of God, being a man of faith, Job had the wisdom and humility to accept that certain things are beyond our ability to comprehend with our rational intellect. He knew that he had to move beyond his natural capacity to faith. And that is what our Lord revealed to the disciples as the key to understanding, the key to fearing not, whether we are in the midst of the storm or witnessing the mighty power of God. He asked the disciples, "Do you not yet have faith?" Faith, then, is the key. Our fallen human condition seems to include, to one degree or another, fearing what we cannot control or do not understand. And perhaps that is why our culture has succumbed to the peculiar notion and grave fallacy of thinking that the only way to understand something, the only way to discover truth, is through science. Or, absent any support from science, by simply declaring whatever our culture wants to be true, to be so, however radical, however nonsensical or sinful something is. Now, arbitrarily deciding something is true in opposition to our God-given human nature or in opposition to reality is simply irrational. Science, on the other hand, a product of human reason and intellect, has its proper place in discovering truth in the material and temporal realm. But the fact is, neither human reason, human intellect, nor science, nor the scientific method exhausts the sources of truth. For faith reveals to us realities and truths not discoverable by science. Realities like truth itself, beauty, and goodness. Truths like wisdom, justice, honor, and love. These are not material realities, and therefore cannot be measured by scientific instruments, nor investigated or described by mind-numbing statistics. Even more important than that, faith leads us to the source of all truth. Faith enables us to go beyond an encounter with a something, an abstract truth, however profound, however sublime, to an encounter with someone, a real, living, and substantial person, truth himself, and this without fear. For this person, the very image of his Father, our Lord Jesus Christ, is also love. All this has particular significance for fathers on this Father's Day, for it serves to remind us that our role in the family goes well beyond providing for their material needs. Indeed, the responsibility of fathers are entrusted with is a sacred one. Our culture is unleashing storms on our children and the family itself, the likes of which we couldn't have even imagined when we were growing up. And our kids will be looking to us to lead them. They will be looking for men of God. And in the midst of these storms, our children need to see us going to Jesus as the disciples did, not in fear, but rather with great confidence, with a kind of faith and love that drives out all fear, the kind that our kids should see we have for them and they for us. That is why our Catholic faith is the most precious gift we can give our children. And while we may not see the fruits of our labor right away, God will honor our efforts to be a witness to our children. He will honor the example we set for them, whatever age they may be and whatever age we start doing so. But we can't simply be men who know something about God. We need to be men of God. They need to see in us men who no longer live for themselves. They need to see that we love our Lord Jesus Christ, that we have an intimate and personal relationship with Him, that we are men of prayer who daily spend time with Him, men who pray with them, who show them how to live out their faith, who show them what love looks like. You know, real men trust in God. Real men pray. Real men lead their families in faith. That is what happens when you move beyond fear and put your faith in Jesus Christ, when you boldly live the faith you profess. Old things pass away. All things become new. And in and through our Lord, we find the faith, courage, and wisdom we need to bring our families safely through the storm.